So I wanted to beat every major boss in Elden Ring with nothing but a crossbow. And before the run began, I thought it would go like this. It didn't. Compared to the far more superior bows, crossbows do not scale off of any of your stats, so your damage only depends on your weapon upgrades and the type of bolt you're using. I had to spend tons of runes on buying bolts and most of my time running around a goddamn tree collecting a bunch of branches. Here's how the run started. Our first objective was to reach Market. Wait, pause. It's supposed to be a Devil May Cry video, so I guess I should probably rename him. Dante. Yes, the first objective of the run was to reach Dante. So let's get prepared to face him. Thankfully, your crossbow is accessible quite early and without having to hit anything. So I just got my motorcycle from Nico, picked up a stone sword key at the Bridge of Sacrifices, and rested at any grace outside Limgrave for her to stop doubting me and take me to Round Table. There, I ignored everybody, especially this guy, and rushed downstairs. I opened the fog gate and picked up my first weapon. I bought some basic bolts from Nico and blasted a bunch of demons outside to get their bones. Then I went to Fort Height and stole some flowers, as well as their collective knowledge to be able to craft blood bolts. I also picked up the Arrow Sting Talisman in Kaled for some extra damage. Finally, I ran past Dante's castle and went to talk to Nico in Leonia to upgrade my crossbow to +2 using the runes I picked up along the way. It was time to meet with Dante. Whoa! Okay, that's like the most offensive thing anyone has ever said to me. So I'm gonna make sure he dies right here, right now. Dante has several long-range moves that I had to play around. I was still getting used to the feel of shooting and reloading with the crossbow, so I got hit quite a bit. Eventually I realized you could roll during the end of the reloading animation to end it faster, so that made it easier. I didn't deal too much damage to him, but I did proc Bloodlust twice and finished him off with normal bolts. It turns out it was just a hologram or something, and he told me we'd meet again if I reached the giant tree that sprouted in the middle of the land. Before exploring the castle, I went to get 2 medallions and opened the path to Altus to collect another crossbow, the pulley crossbow. It shoots 3 bolts at once, and although it doesn't do that much damage, every bolt applies status effects.
I command thee. I am the Lord of all that is golden.
Oh, and just a heads up, if you thought I was going to change every boss's name to Devil May Cry characters, you're dead wrong. I'll only do it when it suits my narrative because it would be too complicated otherwise and I'm kinda lazy. I could stand pretty far back against Godric, and he didn't do much. The only thing I had to take into consideration is that when he started spinning and creating wind around him, he deflected projectiles. So I needed to wait before shooting until the attack was over. Status effect bolts on the pulley crossbow are pretty overpowered in the early game, so he bled to death and I could move on to the academy. I shot the dog dead and parkoured the rooftops to grab a new and shiny secondary crossbow. This will be our source of raw damage when status effects don't need to be applied. This crossbow does a ton of damage, especially paired with the meteor bolts you can buy directly in the academy. Or at Round Table if you gently ask. Be gone, you evil steed! Also, look at that reload animation. Renar's first phase was actually quite easy, since compared to a melee build having to run everywhere, I didn't have to move much, and I just needed to shoot the glowing children. However, she did waste a lot of my ammunition by one-shotting me multiple times in phase 2. Okay, that's good. Oh, I got her. Nice! An interesting thing about only wielding crossbows is that I could spend all of my level ups in vigor and endurance. Even Mind was useless because they can't have any other acheronfois than the kick. I felt a bit underleveled to try and face Radahn, so I decided to get some runes by going through Nico's questline. She wanted me to invade 3 people, so I did just that. The first invasion didn't go too well. On the second invasion though, I met some very nice people. We greeted each other. Third time's the charm. These guys did not want to be my friends either. They wanted me dead. They were probably Dante's allies. I unfortunately encountered a problem during recording right at that time, so here's a factual representation of how valiantly I fought and won a 2v1 against them. The quest was completed and I was able to access Mogwin Palace. As most of you may know already, there is a bird you can trick into falling here if you hit it with a ranged weapon. So I did just that. I did it so much, I started feeling bad for the bird, so I moved on. In this place you can also buy an infinite supply of bleed bolts, and these are better than the ones you can craft. However, Nico is in a cave filled with these blood enemies. I wanted to be able to buy the bolts at round table to make it easier, so I attacked her. And yeah. I couldn't shoot her and run backwards because of the enemies, so I needed to fight in this small part of the cave. And everything she did almost one-shot me. I got killed so many times that giving up seemed like the only reasonable option. But I needed the bolts, and now I couldn't even buy them anymore. So I decided to go back and grab some celestial dew, atone for my sins at the Church of Vows, and buy from her, as if nothing happened. Rodano was my target dummy. I experimented with different types of bolts against him and made the definitive swap to pulley crossbows with status bolts in one hand and full moon crossbow with meteor bolts in the other. I could stand pretty far back in phase 1 and he wasn't too much of a threat. As soon as he started summoning the orbs, I had to pay a bit more attention though. Especially because he would sometimes overlap some attacks in a way that was particularly hard to dodge. Rodano was only the third boss of the run, and although my crossbows weren't fully upgraded, it seemed my damage was falling off very quickly. I died a few times to my own incompetence, but I got it. Oh yeah? You have meteors? Well, I have this! I don't know what to say, really. 3 minutes to the biggest battle of my maidenless life. All comes down to today. Now either I heal as a player. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I don't know what the fuck this is. Skip to the next scene. Even after such an intense fight with the Mimic, the Rigo ancestor still found a way to kill me. It seems even after fighting him so many times, I apparently still suck at rolling the spin attack. I actually had to use more than 100 bolts on him because of the multiple instances of healing, so that was a solid waste as well when I died. But enough running around aimlessly. I had to confront Dante, so I rushed over to the capital, shot this guy down, and went inside. I had to defeat a ghost to reach him, and he was immune to status effects, so I just kept using my full moon crossbow and just shot in between his attacks. It was too slow to do anything about it, so I made my way further up.
You fool! I'm not the enemy. My brother Virgil is. He's right behind me in the tree.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll have to come back here later. I started the next stream by jumping off a cliff into the consecrated snowfield. It is possible to jump and land next to a stake of Marika. You die from the fall, but the game offers to respawn you next to the stake, so you can get down without having to collect the 2 halves of the medallion. They did patch this method recently, but you can still do it by jumping from another spot. I did this as soon as I could because this would allow me to farm an infinite amount of the materials needed to craft crossbows. Then I upgraded my main damaging crossbow to +10 before facing the fire giant. The damage actually felt quite okay. I got through phase 1 without too much trouble, since I could keep shooting him when he rolled away. He killed me a few times in phase 2, but I realized something pretty quick. As expected, the damage from my crossbow would fall off when I was far away. However, status effects would apply just as fast from a distance. So I could use frost and blood bolts in phase 2, and it would still deal lots of damage, even when he stood far away from me. Nope. I immediately rushed to Rykard after this discovery to see if the status effects bolts would be as effective against him as they were against the fire giant. And they were. I just needed to have enough bolts and not die to this goddamn ground attack in phase 1. I ran out of bolts during my first attempts and succumbed to a grab attack. I just wanted you guys to hear the quote. I bought some more bolts and crafted a few extras and went back into the fight. I ran out of frost and blood bolts again, so I just poisoned him and started running in circles until he fainted. Going back to the consecrated snowfield to get some more frost bolts, I decided to push forward and try and reach the hammock tree. This was unexpectedly difficult, because I got bowed down so hard, I actually had to strategize in order to go through the area. The odds were stacked against me. They had better aim and more damage. The one thing I could use is the fact that they couldn't move. What ended up working was shooting the first archer so that she would turn the other way around. Then I jumped on top of the first rooftop and pushed the second archer down to the ground. I could then easily reach the bells and activate the final portal. I ran through the whole Electri area and faced Loretta. She wasn't too difficult, but it was quite interesting to have a ranged versus ranged fight against her. I reached Melania's arena, but I knew I still had many things to do before having the mental fortitude to fight her. I went back to the capital, jumped down the sewers, shot Mog, and went all the way down to Fia's champions. The damage was decent against them, so nothing much to say about the fight. I finally burnt my maiden, upgraded my devil trigger to +9, and crafted a bunch of sleep bolts to face Godskin duo. It really wasn't much of a challenge, since I could make both of them sleep next to each other and just gun them down. One thing I love about Elden Ring is that every challenge run I attempt, I learn new things about various bosses, and this one was no exception. I didn't know before that the Godskin Apostle could deflect projectiles with his spin attack. It wasn't too troublesome since he didn't do it too often, but it was still a cool thing to learn about. I got them on the first try, and since it was my first time actually using sleep on them, it made me realize how different the boss is when you don't have to deal with both of them at once. I finally maxed out the upgrades on my second crossbow and confidently entered Malekith's Floodgate. The first phase was an absolute non-issue. I could stand pretty far away and spam frost and bleed bolts on him for a decent amount of damage every proc. That meant I could train the second phase more intensively, and God knows I needed it. I died many times and found it quite difficult because the boss forced me to be more patient than most other bosses so far. I couldn't just shoot and mindlessly reload right after. I would often get punished. One thing to note, is that I spare you all of the times I had to go back to get these rhymed crystal buds. But every failed attempt was that much more painful because it meant going through one more lap around this cursed tree. I did manage to defeat him by learning what attacks I could afford not to roll but just position efficiently so I could get a few more bolts in. There were still a few more bosses to face before Virgil, so let's go through them real quick. First was Mog, and he was surprisingly easy because he had no dodge or block against long-range projectiles, so I could stand pretty far back and keep applying status effects. He did get me on the first try because I kept taking damage from the fiery blood on the ground and ran out of flasks, but I went back in, and although I almost ran out of bolts by the end, I finished him off. Then it was 40 Sanks. He is to this day the only boss I have not died to. Mostly because my builds usually have a decent amount of health and he doesn't deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but also because at that point in the game, you've probably put many dragons' ambitions to rest. Against Astor, I used purely physical bolts in the Devil Trigger, and it actually dealt more damage than I expected, especially against such a late game boss. Once I ran out, I just kept shooting the magic bolts that I already had equipped 3 at a time, and it ended up being a rather easy fight as well. V was interesting to fight since I could just start shooting and cancel him out of any spell he might want to use. Godfrey is usually a lot of fun to fight, but even more so with this build. You can't just stay far away and rain bolts down on him because he dashes to you and he has moves that affect the entire arena. So you still have to roll and jump his moves while weaving in shots and reloads in between. I got a stagger at the beginning of second phase, and after that the strategy was pretty much the same, except I had to pay attention to his many grab attacks because the range on those is pretty long. Next up was Placidusax, and since I am apparently unable to learn how this entire fight functions, he killed me on low health on my first attempt. Thankfully, it only took 2 attempts after that to finally get a good fight. I just needed to stay far enough away to not have to deal with the double laser, and it worked out. Malenia was next, and she was quite troublesome. She would always dodge bolts coming out of a neutral position, so I had to always bait an attack and then shoot after. Even then, her hitbox is quite small and some of my bolts would sometimes miss. Her health being quite high was also a problem since I couldn't use my status effects bolts for the whole fight. I would run out. I decided that I should only use magic bolts in phase 1 and swap to status effects only once reaching phase 2. That really helped because I didn't have to go and farm all of the materials for elemental bolts every time I died to the first phase. Other than that, it was my 3rd time fighting Malenia in general, so I still wasn't perfect, especially in dodging a dash attack. Second phase was less of a problem because I could use the Frost and Bleed bolts, and they dealt a good chunk of her health every time they procced. I could also shoot her quite a lot every time she would go into Scarlet Eonia, so that was nice. I died to second phase quite early on in my attempts, and it was quite painful because I died to a wall. After a few more tries, I got a decent attempt that was almost ruined because I cancelled her out of Scarlet Eonia, even though I could have finished her off if I didn't. I still won that fight, and it felt goddamn amazing. What the f?
Extraordinary.
confronted Virgil, and he taught me that no matter how hard Millennia is, he would always find a way to be even more powerful. In all seriousness, this was by far the hardest boss of the run. Virgil has really good status resistance, and he's immune to bleed. Even when using normal or magic bolts, I was dealing very little damage. But that wasn't even the worst part. I could rarely shoot him. He would always absorb my bolts and either counter with a ranged attack or a melee one. The only way for me to deal damage was to dodge an attack with a long enough recovery and punish with one bolt. Then I had to dodge another and reload, etc. Even after adopting this strategy, he would still slowly burn through all of my flasks before I could kill him. I could feel like I wasn't making progress, and instead of blaming my own inaptitude, I decided I probably needed some rest and come back to him the next day. I was determined to beat Virgil, and opted to min-max my build so I would have an easier time dealing with him. I grabbed a bunch of Sacred Tears, the Crimson Seed Talisman, some Aeonian Butterflies, and bought familiar armor. With this, I could beat Virgil. I got into the boss fight, used enough rot bolts to get him rotten, and then switched to poison bolts to get him poisoned. I didn't have many tries, mainly because the Aeonian Butterflies were in limited quantity in the game, but also because I mistakenly crafted a bunch of rot arrows instead of bolts. I refreshed the dots whenever it was needed and kept focusing on dodging most of his moves. Dante did not die in vain. I would avenge him and take his brother's life. And I did. But it wasn't over. Virgil melted into the ground, and this huge creature emerged. The Devil Beast. I was astonished by this unexpected plot twist, and so I got hit way too many times when the fight started. But somehow, as the fight went on, I adapted. I got better. Was it the armor giving me power? Was it Dante sending me his strength from the grave? I didn't know, but I wouldn't let it go to waste. I would shoot this creature down to the ground, wait for it to get back up, and shoot it again, until it learned to stay down. Eventually, the run came to an end.
So, Devil's Cry, huh? Let's hear what that sounds like!